Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
Let's welcome today's speaker, Francine.
Thank you. Thanks, Gregory. Oh, wow. Just breathe. This is amazing. I haven't been here in a while, and it's always nice to be back in this room. I want to first thank Lydia for this very, very loving invitation to be of service this morning. And happy birthday to all the birthday people. Pretty awesome. And welcome to all of you that are new, especially those of you for whom this is your very first meeting. I think there were 3 or 4 of you in the back that came up for the very first meeting. Oh, I'm Francine, alcoholic. I thought, oh my God, did I forget that? I am absolutely an alcoholic, as you will hear, so make no mistake about that. I'm so grateful to be here, so very grateful. I want to start out by reading something. This week I was meeting with one of my sponsees, and she's having a difficult time. She's about 28 years sober, and we started reading this, and I just thought this would be a great thing to open up with for me as a reminder. It's in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it's on page 24, and it goes, at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it is suspected. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable, at certain times, to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. You know, it's so important that I remember that because my sobriety date is July 26, 1979. And just to do the math quickly, I haven't had a drink or a drug in 35 years. And I have to tell you, that amazes me more than it amazes anybody in here. But what happens with long-term sobriety, and some of you probably know, is we have a tendency to forget. You know, in the last couple of years, I've seen many, many, many people with over 25 years go out. And I believe it's simply because we forget. And so as I was reading this with a sponsee, I realized it wasn't really for her. It was a reminder to me never to forget. And so I stand before you this morning so humbled in the face of this disease. You know, I think that the longer I'm sober, the more grateful I am. And maybe you can appreciate that today. And maybe those of you that are around a long time, I guess you can, because I've got more to lose than I ever have, ever in my whole life. I'm just so very grateful. And if you don't hear anything else from me this morning, my hope is that you hear how much I love Alcoholics Anonymous and how much I love what you've given to me and what you've allowed me to give to myself over the last 35 years. Last week I was watching an old episode of Law & Order SVU, and anybody who's talked to me for more than 5 minutes knows that I'm a Law & Order fan. And I was watching this episode, and during the course of, well, this episode was about a sergeant's daughter, a 15-year-old daughter who had run away. And throughout the entire episode, they were in search of this girl. And they discovered during the course of the show that she had been strung out on drugs and she had gotten engaged in pornography. And at the very end of the show, there was resolution, of course. And at the very end, they found her in an abandoned warehouse underneath a pile of trash with a needle stuck in her arm. She's dead. And, you know, I've seen that particular episode maybe 4, 5, 6 times since it came out in 2001. I mean, again, I'm a Law & Order fan, without question. But, you know, every single time I see that, or I have seen that show, it's reminded me that that could have been me. But for the grace of God, there go I. At 15 years old, I was strung out on drugs. By the time I was 18, I was selling my body. You know, the only difference is that I get to be here today without having had a drink or drug in a long time. And I'm so grateful for that. And yet I never, ever, ever want to forget where I've come from. I was born almost 62 years ago. Even just saying that, it's like, it's hard to say 61, so it's easier to kind of jump over. I'll be 62 next month, and you know, I don't remember a lot about those really early days of my life. I'd love to stand up here and tell you, like some speakers, they can run off what they had for breakfast when they were 5. I do not have a clue. But what I do remember about those early days of my life is I remember how I felt. You know, I don't remember the details, but I remember how I felt as a little kid. And I can tell you more than anything else, what I remember is that I hurt all the time. I was a little kid who hated living in this skin. I hated being in this body all the time. I live up in Marin, and if any of you are familiar with Mill Valley, I was driving into San Francisco a couple of weeks ago, and I get my exit is the Stinson Beach exit right at the Buckeye. So I was driving onto the freeway into San Francisco, and there was a hitchhiker with a big sign that said, "Anywhere but here." And I got it. And some of you can probably appreciate it. I got it. That's exactly how I felt all of my life. I wanted to be anywhere but here. Anywhere but in this body, in this skin, having this experience. I hated who I was as a kid. I hated being black. I hated being a girl. I hated being a Southerner. I hated being poor. And, you know, often I hear people who get up on the platform who've grown up poor, and they'll say, you know, I used to be poor, but I never remembered it. Well, I can just tell you that is not my experience. I grew up poor, and I absolutely remember being poor. I grew up in the South Bronx, and I had an intimate relationship with powdered eggs and powdered milk. And I remember as a kid, I'd get up in the middle of the night and go for some water, and I'd open up the cupboard. I'd turn on the light and open up the cupboard in the kitchen, and the roaches would just pour out. That's what I grew up with. And so I remember it quite vividly, what it was like being poor, and I hated it. I hated every single moment of it. I hated being a Southerner. I hated being a girl. But mostly I hated being black. I was born in 1953 during a time when in the South where the bathrooms were colored and white. And it's interesting, welcome to the woman from Atlanta. I was in Atlanta last week for Thanksgiving, and I remember this memory. of the pain of growing up as a little kid in Atlanta. I remember I had gone into a bathroom accidentally that said white because I didn't know. I wasn't paying attention, and boy, did I get railed. As a little kid, I didn't even understand what was going on, but I got so railed. So I learned at a very early age that if you look like me, it was just not a good thing to do. And so as a little kid, I remember using razor blades to scrape off my skin and not use bleach and cream to try to take off my color because I couldn't stomach living in this body. I remember there was a wonderful television movie that came out, I think it was maybe 1989, 1991, and I often like to share about this story because better than anything I could describe, this movie talks about how I felt as a kid. The movie was called Separate But Equal, and it was about the former Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall's effort to create change in this country. And I remember in the movie there was a segment, they were trying to understand the impact of segregation on small children. They were trying to understand the impact of segregation on a child's self-esteem. And I remember they brought all these kids together in a control group setting, and they just asked them a lot of questions. They had little black kids, little white kids, little girls, little boys. No trick questions. They just asked them a number of questions. And I remember they came to this little black girl who by almost anybody's standard was so adorable. She had long pigtails, big bubble bangs, and little freckles on her face. She was so cute. And there were 4 little dolls sitting in front of her. There was a little black boy doll, a little white boy doll, a little black girl doll, and a little white girl doll. And they came to her and asked her a simple question. They said, pick out the ugliest doll of the 4. That was all. It wasn't a trick. They said, pick out the ugliest of the 4 dolls. And without hesitating for a moment, without blinking her eye, she didn't pick the doll that looked like you. She didn't pick the doll that looked like you. She didn't pick the doll that looked like you. Instead, she grabbed a hold of the doll that looked exactly like herself. Because you see, for her, that was the ugliest person she knew. That was what eventually got me to pick up a drink. Feeling those feelings of low self-esteem. Feeling those feelings of that I wasn't good enough, I didn't fit, I didn't belong. And if there was anybody paying attention to me as a little kid, they would know that eventually I was going to find something that was going to take away that pain. Something that was going to just take the edge off. And my earliest escape in life came through books and movies. Long before I ever picked up a drink or a drug, I loved books. My mom was a librarian, and we had books in every room, on every wall, everywhere. It was wonderful. Sometimes I'd take a book off the shelf and I'd sit in a corner all by myself, and I think my mom probably thought I was trying to become a smart kid. But you know what was happening? When I opened up a book, between those binders was magic. When I opened up a book, all of a sudden, I was like Cinderella going to the ball. Didn't matter how I felt, it didn't matter how I looked, it didn't matter what I thought. For a moment in time, for a slice in time, I was okay with who I was, just for that moment. And I loved it. And I got introduced to movies when, although today they're called old movies, but when I was young, they were not so old. But I loved women like Betty Davis, and they're all dead today, I realize. Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and Barbara Stanwyck and Susan Hayward. I love those women. They were my idols. They were women who had a glass in one hand, they had a cigarette in the other, and they didn't take a whole lot of garbage off anybody, and I loved it. I loved them because I'm a little kid with a hole that was so huge, nothing could fill it, nothing. And so books and movies were great. They were my earliest escape, and I just loved it. And you know, eventually what happens in the stage for all of us as alcoholics, when we use something outside of ourselves, eventually it turns on us, and it doesn't do the thing that we had hoped that it would do. And eventually, instead of taking me to a different place, the books and movies made it perfectly clear that this was the hand I was dealt, and I wasn't going anywhere else. And you know, I'd love to stand up here and tell you that I just knew immediately I was going to use drugs and alcohol behind that, but it didn't happen like that. I didn't consciously think of it like that. But eventually, you know, my need to fill that hole took me to using chemicals. And it was during a time in the 60s when it was about better living through chemistry. People used chemicals to come up, to go down, you know, to level off. I mean, I used chemicals simply because I could. But mostly it was because I needed to feel different than the way I felt. You know, I'm not one of those people who like the taste of alcohol, and I know most people in Alcoholics Anonymous love the taste and they talk about it. In case there's somebody in here this morning who did not like the taste, I want you to know I'm one who did not. I hated the taste of alcohol until after the first drink, and then, of course, it didn't matter. But I hated the taste of alcohol. But you know what I did? I loved the effect. I loved what it did for me and what it allowed me to do for myself. So I didn't care whether I liked how it tasted. I just kept drinking and drinking and drinking. I sometimes look down the road and I think to myself, had I known where I was going when I picked up that first drink, I would have never, ever done it. That's my belief for myself. You know, had I really known, as I looked down the road through this ball, this crystal ball, had I seen where I was about to go when I picked up that first chemical, I got to tell you for myself, I would have never chosen to walk into the lion's den. I would have never chosen to do that. I would have never chosen to give up my whole life, my soul, my whole being to a bottle. I wouldn't have chosen to do that. But you see, I believe that I didn't have that choice. I believe that once I took the first drink and used the first drug, all sense of choice left me. Today, I happen to believe I'm somebody that has a choice. I don't drink, I don't use drugs. If I choose to drink today, I made that conscious choice. But back then, when I was in the midst of my disease, I didn't have the choice. And I believe, though, had I known, I would have never stepped in. I would have never stepped into the lion's den. Alcoholism took me to places that I would have never, ever, ever gone as a woman, ever. And you know, prostitution was only a piece of it. It was not. It's a part of my history that I so totally hate and regret, but it wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. The worst thing that happened to me was just who I became overall as a woman, what I allowed myself to become, what I allowed you to do to me, where I allowed myself to go. I mean, my mom trained me to be a really good little kid. I believe that today. But what happened once I started to drink and use drugs, it was almost like Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. Something came in and just grabbed a hold of me, and I had no sense of control. I just had no sense of control. I became willing to do anything for a drug. Anything for a drug, anything for a drink. And you know, today I look at the young girls in particular, but the young guys too that come in, and my heart just so goes out because I know what we have to do to get here. Not everybody has the same path, but if you be alcoholic like me, your path was vile and wretched and long and winding and painful. And today, but for the grace of God, I don't have to be there. I was first introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1978, but I was too young. You know, my belief is, how in the world could you be an alcoholic? I was only 25 years old. There's no way I could be an alcoholic. And plus, my idea of an alcoholic was that old man on the Bowery with the overcoat and the bottle hanging out of his pocket with the big red popping veins popping out of his face. That was an alcoholic. And if by chance it was a female, if it was a woman, I didn't really believe women could be alcoholics. But if it was, well, of course it was Susan Hayward in I'll Cry Tomorrow. She's digging in the garbage can, trying to get booze, the last drop out of a bottle. I have to tell you, I conveniently forgot that that's where I found myself. But that was an alcoholic woman. Or it was Lee Remick in Days of Wine and Roses when she's hiding booze in the greenhouse. I didn't even have a greenhouse. How could I be an alcoholic? That's my thinking. And what an alcoholic way to think, we are so good at, who was it? One of the speakers talked about interpreting the rules. We are so good at interpreting the rules. And so was I. I told you how old I was. Now, what did I lose? So anyway, I couldn't stop drinking. I just couldn't stop drinking. And I was introduced to AA when I was 25, didn't stay sober, because again, I was just too young. But God has a way of helping those that can't help themselves. And I believe I was sicker than most people, which is why I got here as young as I did in the way that I did. I moved out to Las Vegas, Nevada from New York looking for my pot of gold. Some of you can relate. It was that I thought that New York was the cause of my problems. That was really it. And so I figured if I left New York City and I moved out to Vegas, poof, everything's going to be okay. Well, God had a different plan, and I didn't even believe in God at the time. That's what's so ironic. I moved out to Vegas, and it took about 9 months for this God that I didn't believe in to just put a stop to my life as I had known it. I got hit by a car in a blackout in June of 1979. And, even today I don't remember what happened. I've kind of imagined the worst. I've tried to piece together things in my mind, but, I am totally incapable of separating the real from the unreal. So I don't even know what happened, but what was told to me. Or rather, the last thing I remember, I was sitting in a discotheque in Las Vegas, Nevada that used to be appropriately named the Brewery. Many of you remember that. And then the next thing I remember, I was in a hospital, in Desert Springs Hospital, with my body in traction, and my left leg was in a cast all the way up my thigh. And I don't know what happened in between. And what they told me was that when the cops found me, they found me on Paradise Road in a direction opposite from my house. And they didn't think I was going to live. And when they realized I would live, they never thought I'd ever walk again, because when they found me, my left leg came up behind my head and the bone came straight through. And I have to tell you, I don't hide it, I have a 10-inch scar on my leg that you can see it. And you can see where the bone had come straight through. And, over the years, people have said, Francine, have you ever thought about covering that up? Because it's such an ugly scar, and it really is. It's a very unattractive scar. But you know what? For today, I choose not to cover it up. For today, I choose not to have plastic surgery on that leg, because every time I look at this leg, I'm reminded of the very high price I had to pay to stand before you this morning. And you know, it was a very, very high price. And I'm so grateful to be here. But I look at that leg and it's like, yeah, that's what it took me. And every time I look at that leg, I'm reminded of every drink I've ever taken, of every drug I've ever put in my body, and of every inappropriate act as a woman I've ever performed. And so I want to be reminded of where I've come from. I'd also like to tell you, however, that, that wasn't enough to stop me. And if you're a real deal alcoholic sitting in this room this morning, you know no mere car accident is going to stop you if you are on a mission. And I continued to drink for another month and a half. And then that day came. And, I cannot tell you that my last drink was my worst, because it absolutely was not. But my last drink was what I hope was my last. I came to on this day in July of 1979, July 26, 1979, and I wanted to live more than I wanted to die. That was it. Again, there were no big fancy lights. There were no drums beating. Nobody was there meeting me with a parade. It was just, I just came to, and I wanted to live more than I wanted to die. And I haven't had a drink or drug since then. I'd love to stand up here and tell you that it's been smooth sailing. I'd love to tell you that I was a perfect little Miss AA. I want to tell you that, but there are some people in here that remember when I lived here. It's never been an easy journey. But what I can tell you is the journey has always been worth it. Always been worth it. I stand before you an amazing miracle in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a low-bottom drunk. I'm a drug-addicted alcoholic prostitute with a 1% chance of survival. There's no way in the world that someone like me gets to live the life that I get to live today. I've been able to do lots of things in my sobriety, and, it's but for the grace of God that I'm not dead. I was 2 years sober, and I was 30 days sober, and probably the single most important thing that ever has happened to me next to get sober is that I was to meet the woman who was to become the single most important person in my life. And I hated her with a passion. I hated Louise so much. And, God bless her, she's in that big AA meeting in the sky. She died with about 49 years of recovery. But I hated Louise. And you know why I hated her? Because she was the first person who had the courage to tell me the truth. You see, she didn't care that I didn't like her. And it's a good thing, because I didn't. But, she didn't care. I felt she was just too old to know what it was like to be new and young and cute. That was my thinking. She was 59 years old when I met her. She was like over the hill. She was 19 years sober. She had long since been a newcomer. What did she know? She was trying to kind of stifle my growth. That was my thinking. She didn't want me to do a lot of things. She wanted me to change my behavior. Let me read something to you. From As Bill Sees It, which is my favorite book, and this is actually my original one, you can tell. When I got sober, I used to hear a lot of people say, oh, this is just about not drinking. And thank God I had a sponsor who did not believe that. Thank God I had a sponsor who was into the literature, all of it, and she said, this is not just about not drinking. And she guided me to what Bill W. says, actually. If anybody's thinking that, on the very first page of As Bill Sees It, Bill W. writes this. It has often been said of AA that we are interested only in alcoholism. That is not true. We have to get over drinking in order to stay alive. But anyone who knows the alcoholic personality by firsthand contact knows that no true alkie ever stops drinking permanently without undergoing a profound personality change. Not a little personality change, not a personality change if you feel like it, but if you want to be here for the long haul, we've got to change the people that crawled in here. And you know what? I know that's to be true. I know it. Because I believe if I was still the same woman who crawled in here in 1979, I would not be here. I wouldn't. There's no way I'd be able to survive. And Louise had me make a lot of changes in my life. I had a nasty little habit of sleeping with other people's husbands. I personally couldn't understand why she thought it was such a bad thing, but she did, and it was one of those little personality changes she thought I should make. You know, I came in here dressing like a hooker. Now, even when I wasn't a hooker anymore, I was dressing like what? I used to come to meetings with little hot pants the size of a sash, about 6 inches. And I was a lot thinner then, but my cheeks were still hanging wide out. And I used to have these little tops that were, it was like you wonder why I even had a top on, because these pieces of scarf that would cover not much, you know, and she thought that was inappropriate. She said, you know, if you act like a hooker, if you dress like a hooker, you will be treated like a hooker, no matter what. And she believed that my behavior mattered. That behavior matters. She believed, especially for women, that the underlying piece of alcoholism for most women had to do with our behavior, our esteem, our self-esteem that was tied to how we acted. She also had me change the way I spoke, and this is not to say anybody needs to do anything, but my mouth was really filthy. I came in and I cursed simply because I could. And, you know, I learned how not to curse, actually, by reading in the books, because I didn't understand half the words that were in the books, like voracious and vicissitude. No, it was rapacious and vicissitude. Whoever heard of that? I didn't even know what the word humble meant. So I used to go, obviously, and I used to go into the dictionary and I looked up all these words. And you know what started to happen? I started to have a love affair with books. Again, not when I was a kid I did, but then in AA I started again, which eventually took me back to school. I went back to school when I was 2 years sober. I'm a high school dropout. Again, ex-hooker with a criminal record with 3-4 minutes left. I became a lawyer in this program. I've been a lawyer for almost 24 years. And I'm admitted to 3 of the most difficult bars in the country: New York, California, and D.C. And I got to tell you, there are people in this room, when I was struggling through the California bar, long after I was a New York lawyer, I couldn't get through the California bar. And there are people who are here who remember how I'd get up on the platform and I'd cry and I failed again. But you know what? I got up here and told you. And because I did that, I didn't drink. Because I had the courage to tell you the truth and pull my covers and let you see. I didn't drink. I didn't drink. And I got past it. And, you know, now that's so past me. You know, I've been practicing law for a long time. And, you know, I'm very blessed that I get to do what I love in the practice of law. You know, I was talking to a relative newcomer the other day, and she was saying, Francine, what is it that keeps you sober? You know, what is it? I mean, and I started to explain to her that all the things that we talk about, I go to lots of meetings. I still go to a lot of meetings with 35 years of sobriety. I live in Marin. We have a home in the desert. I'm in the desert every month. I'm in meetings all the time, all the time. I still work with a sponsor, not just in name, but in reality. I have a sponsor who actually has me, with 35 years, calling her every week. So sometimes I think to myself, doesn't she know who I am? I'm sober almost as long as her. But she doesn't care, and you know what? She's my sponsor, and I do what she says. So I do it. I still work with sponsees. I still work with women. I still do service. I've been involved in HI since I was 3 months sober. Actually, I've been involved in real HI since I was 6 months, because that's when they allowed me to go into Gene prison, when I was 6 months sober. But I've been doing some kind of HNI work since then. You know, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. But if I had to tell you one thing that really has helped me to stay sober, it has been my willingness to be uncomfortable. That is the single most important thing that I believe that has enabled me not to drink and use drugs, because there have been many days that I've been uncomfortable, from failing bar exams to losing animals to losing friends to losing family members to relocating to all the stuff that we go through on a daily basis, being fired from jobs, being stuck in a job I hated, whatever. You know, not having money, but being willing to be uncomfortable has been the thing that I believe has kept me here. Because there are days when I want to drink, but I don't. I'm so grateful to be here. I want to close with this. This is, I like to end with my talks with this. This is from As Bill Sees It as well, and it's on page 4. It's entitled, Can We Choose? We must never be blinded by the futile philosophy that we are just the hapless victims of our inheritance, of our life experience, and of our surroundings. That these are the sole forces that make our decisions for us. This is not the road to freedom. We have to believe that we can really choose. And you know what? That's what you've given me in 35 years of sobriety. Given me the gift of choice. You've taught me that it doesn't matter where I've come from. It doesn't matter what kind of history I had. It doesn't matter about any of that stuff. That the only thing that matters today in the overall scheme of things is what I do with this most precious gift that you've given me. And not just what I do with it in an AA meeting, because it's relatively easy to be nice in AA. Relative. But the real work is out there. You know, it's what happens when somebody, like this morning, I was going into Gelson. What happens when somebody cuts in front of you and takes your only parking spot? Do you give them the finger? Do you call them all those expletives? You know, what happens if you're standing on the line in the supermarket in the section that says 10 items or less and they've got 50? You know, you've taught me that that's where the real work is, out there. That this is my laboratory, but the real work is out there. And it's not just, well, it's out there. It's how I treat my husband. It's how I treat my family. It's how I treat my friends. You know, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much for my support.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.